one is also really timely on our calendars because we just celebrated Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israel Independence Day, on the Jewish calendar, and we're about to celebrate it on the secular calendar, though you're going to see some interesting things happen because we're also going to see, of course, a lot of anti-Israel stuff happen next week because we have a really weird situation, and it's something we're going to talk about, which is the fact that we have obviously two narratives that are going on right now when it comes to Israel. A narrative that, um, unfortunately, more and more Jews are succumbing to, which is that um, you can be a Zionist, you can be anti-Zionist and not be anti-Semitic. That there's a difference between Zionism and Judaism, and more of our young people are have unfortunately either succumbed to some kind of pressure on this issue. They have been, um, I would say it this way: the where the anti-Israel um, energy is coming from on the left, which is what most of our young people are surrounded by, is based on is being promulgated by people who are telling themselves that they are supporting a an oppressed people versus the oppressors. And so it's one of the reasons why in communities like in the feminist communities today that Israel is under such attack because um, as they positioned themselves with other minorities, Palestinians have said we are the people of color who are being oppressed by white colonialists. And so this has become a narrative that has it went from being kind of fringe to over the last few years becoming established. And I've thought about how scary it is. To me, it's very similar in some ways, and not exact. And I don't want anybody to say this is what I said because I said it's similar, but it's very similar to what we've had for many years in the Jewish community as in a similar way to Messianism, to Jews for Jesus situation. Because I have no issue with people. I mean, I have a lot of friends who are Christian. I have a lot of respect for Christianity. We talked about Christianity over the last several weeks, and I think you can see that I have appreciation for and obviously have no bad feelings for Christians or Christianity. But don't pretend that messianism, that being a Jews for Jesus is Judaism. It's not. It's Christianity. So call it Christianity and don't pretend that it isn't. It's a lie. There's a problem with what's happening now with anti-Zionism, which is it's presenting itself as a form of defending the oppressed, when in reality it is a form of anti-Semitism that Jews are not realizing they're getting sucked into because it's not being presented as anti-Semitism. That people are just saying, "Well, I love Jews, but Israel is an oppressive state. It's an ethnic state. It's a nation that's inflicting genocide on an oppressed people." So what it's doing, and why I say the similarities there, is that form of anti-Semitism that's now called anti-Zionism is really a nefarious lie. It's not. It's presenting itself as something that it's not. And again, some people don't realize that they're sucked into this, but yet they are. And it's 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 very upsetting because it's affected us in a much larger way. And we don't know how destructive this is going to be to Judaism and to the Jewish people long term. People have for the last probably 50 to 60 years, and really since the beginning, it always was part of Israel's story, was they tried to separate Judaism from um, from Israel. And there were obviously, as we talked about last week when we talked about early Zionism, there were Jews who originally were not supportive of Israel because they thought there were other options. They thought assimilation was an option. They thought, Jews could be wonderful citizens of France or Germany or Soviet Union or United States, and that would save them. And of course, we talked about it over the last few weeks. The Holocaust proved that that was a lie. It actually was proven to people like Theodore Herzl during the Dreyfus trial and the rise of anti-Semitism at the turn of the last century. But this I this the 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 fact that after the Holocaust, and we're going to look at this today, because today we're just going to be talking about the first 20 years of Israel's existence. And just before, we're going to pick up where we left off after talking about early Zionism. The 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 Holocaust proved all those people wrong, and virtually, I'm not saying every Jew, but virtually every Jew in the wake of 1940, when we woke up from the nightmare of the Holocaust, those who survived said, "No, we can survive. We can survive in the diaspora, but if there is no Israel, we are doomed to repeat this cycle of anti-Semitism, leading to pogroms, leading to death, leading to exile, and moving from one place to another. This will continue. This cycle will perpetuate, and we've seen it for 2,000 years. We can't see it any longer, and nothing will save us from that, including modernity, because if the Nazis, who are the most advanced country coming out of Germany, the most advanced country in 1930, can perpetrate this barbarity, there is no safe place in the modern world. Modernity is no longer safe. There is no space in the world. So we have no choice. And so that was proven by history, and the religious Zionists who started really to grow also during that period said, okay, we're not waiting for the Messiah. God clearly has a plan for us, and maybe the suffering of the Holocaust will lead to a brighter tomorrow, that it will lead to something that we've never had for 2,000 years and effectively never had within a framework of nation states, is a Jewish state. And that's kind of what we talked about last week, because I purposely we had a session about the Holocaust before. So if you weren't there for it, please go back and watch the Holocaust part. But I hope most of us are knowledgeable enough about what happened so that I don't have to go back a lot today. But last time we talked about the forms of Zionism that took place before 1948, and I showed you, and I'm going to start right now with what happened with regards to the waves of immigration. And so, what happened? Wait, let me show you one thing first, which is the let me show you this, which is and this is going to be a theme for today, which is the waves of immigration that built the land of Israel. But we talked about these last week, and I've posted this up on last week's. I didn't share this timeline, but we went through it. I posted it up. It's on our website now. If you go to our online materials, you can download all of this material, and the materials we have will be posted today for today's. But we went through these waves of Aliyah. And just again, to remind you, we had the first Aliyah, which was really primarily from Russia and from Romania, the area we call Bessarabia, which also is Moldova, Jews fleeing pogroms. And these are some of the places that they settled. The second Aliyah, which was the wave that really built the kibbutzim, the immigrants like Eliezer ben Yehuda, who helped build the Hebrew language. This really kind of came up to World War One. There was kind of an end to that wave with World War One, and then it picked back up with the third Aliyah after World War One, where you had people who were fleeing the Russian Revolution, and this was, as you can see, a fairly large group, still primarily from Eastern Europe. In the fourth Aliyah, which really started becoming a wave of immigration that starts to see people dealing with the economic fallout of the Depression and of the rise of tension post World War One, and you start to see people coming from Poland, from areas that are that still mostly Eastern European Jews, but now you also have people who were not able to get into the United States because this is about the time that the U.S. starts imposing quotas for Jews. The fifth Aliyah was primarily Jews from areas that have now come under control of the Nazis. So this means that we have German and Austrians that are coming here. And this was an interesting group because tended to be a little wealthier. They tended to be there to try to, establish some of the cultural centers, the cafes, the universities. This is when a lot of the Jews came started to come from further west. And then after the war, and during the war, and after Hitler came to power, we have the times of illegal immigration. You can see there's kind of an overlap here, but reality is that this also includes the issue that the British stopped allowing Jews to come in during this period, becomes illegal, and these are people who start coming in during World War II, but also in 1945 and 46. These are Jews that are, for the most part, Holocaust survivors, and they are sneaking in. And this is when you have, like what the movie Exodus shows, people who are literally, in some cases, arrested and thrown into camps in Cyprus. Interestingly, Eddie Hirsch's, our friend Eddie, his parents met at that camp in Cyprus where they were both taken after the war. The only people in their families that survived the Holocaust, they met there, and I think she was about 19 years old at the time. His mother, Mina, they met, and it's amazing, their story, but there were a lot of those stories. And Eddie was actually born in Israel. People don't know that necessarily about him, but yeah, he was born out of in Israel from parents who survived. To give you an idea of what this looks like, this is another chart that shows you percentage-wise where these people come from over the period of after World War One. Really, again, from the third Aliyah through the illegal uh, into World War II, but during that period where the last part of this is when Israel becomes a place that the British don't let Jews go to. They block immigration to the British mandate. So you can see, you have a little trickle of Jews that are coming in up to the World War II period. But you can see again, primarily Poland. Uh, you have Russian immigrants coming in, and also once Hitler comes to power, you have German Jews coming in. Um, I will tell you that when we continue today, you're going to see again, this map will show you on a chart where these Jews are coming from. And you'll see that it shifts from Eastern Europe up through 1948 period to, again, North Africa.
Can you make it smaller, Rabbi?
What? Smaller?
Can you make it smaller?
Yeah.
Not too much smaller, but a little bit smaller.
Yeah.
Also, it's
Yeah.
interesting. There's no mention of Canada. Others.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. This will also give you an idea of immigrants by year since 1948. But let's get to 1948 first. But I want you to know that the story of Israel is a story of constant immigration. This is I mean, look, we're going to get to this not until next week or 2 weeks from we don't have I want to just remind people, and I'll remind you again, we have no class next Wednesday. I'll be out of town, but we're going to pick it up the week after. So when we pick it up, we'll get to 1990s. But you can see, look at this huge spike of immigration. This is all you can see, almost entirely Jews from the former Soviet Union. And at the very top, Jews from Africa, the Ethiopian Jews. So this period of time that wasn't that long ago, remember, it was only 35 years ago. This huge spike was what happened. So we're going to talk about that. But it's really important to know that immigration to the land of Israel has been constant over the years, and it's part of a continuum, which is the story of how Israel is built. We have a tendency, and I'm going to try not to fall into it, to define and tell the story of Israel's history over the last, when we're doing basically an 80-year run in history over 3 classes. And it's amazing, obviously, we talked about 4,000 years of Jewish history over 6 sessions. We're going to talk about 80 years of history over 3 sessions. It's very, and you probably know what I'm going to say. It's very simple, and it becomes very easy to talk about Israel's history through the lens of the wars that it's fought, right? It's very easy to do that, and it's dangerous to do that. It's a reduction, obviously, of Israel's story. It's a sad part of Israel's story, but it's only part of Israel's story, and I don't want to fall into that. I don't want to fall into the trap of only talking about war, because Israel doesn't exist if they don't win the wars. But there is no Israel without these waves of immigration. If there's no people, and so it's we if we don't talk about this and we don't understand it and we can't tell people about it, because I'm jumping around, but if we don't tell people the story of Israel through the story of Aliyah, then we miss the point, because Israel doesn't exist and didn't exist to fight. Israel existed as the homeland for the Jewish people. And of course, part of that, why it's important for us to understand that, is for us to destroy the myth that Israel is a place of white Jews who are the colonizers, because we start to believe that. We have, unfortunately, a generation of young people, as I said, who have been brainwashed into, and even some of the kids who've been on birthright have forgotten that the majority of people who live in Israel have ancestors who did not come from Europe. Even though I showed you those charts of where the first waves of Jews came from, that is not the story of what really happened. So let's take a look at the let's take a look at how Israel came to be in 1940, in the War of 1948. But let's start, of course, in 1947, or let's start with the British Mandate. The British, and when we talk about Israel's story, obviously, we talk about the fact, and one of the interesting facts that both Israel and the United States share, is that we were born out of being British colonies. We forget sometimes of the commonality that we have as both Americans and people who care about Israel, is that both of our countries were at one point part of Britain. We didn't. We fought a war against Britain. Israel didn't so much fight a war against Britain, but let's put it this way: they wanted Britain out, and the British were actually fighting Jews and Arabs who wanted them out. The British Mandate was not popular for anybody. Nobody really wanted it, and most British people back home didn't want to keep Israel either, which was interesting because there were British Christians who thought, wow, we control Israel. We control the Holy Land. But for the most part, Britain was not interested in becoming a the new crusader European country that controls it and has the ability to say, look at us, we're the holy people that control Jerusalem. They weren't interested in that really. So after World War II, the 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 British were in a severe crisis in their own country, right? And they were rebuilding their own country. And so what they were faced with was um, a problem in that they could no longer really deal with their they could no longer deal with the colonies that had become part of um, more of a weight than something um, that were successful for them, that were a source of stability for them. The bigger one, of course, much bigger one, as you know, was India. And so the British pulled out of India and what later became Pakistan in 1947. Well, around that same time, they also said, we have to pull out of Palestine. We have to pull out of that mandate. And so they did. And so the history of Israel, of course, goes back to the fact that the British did get frustrated with the Jews who were, in some cases, once the war was over, they were promised that they were going to get this country, and they wanted the country. Well, how is this going to happen? And so the British basically turned it over to the United Nations, and the United Nations came up with a plan of partitioning Israel between the areas that were mostly held by Arabs, which in this map are these yellow parts, and then the Jewish state, which is this greenish part. Of course, Jerusalem here was supposed to be an international city, which was going to be maintained by the world. The United Nations would maintain it. So this was going to be the map of the Arab and Jewish states. Now, the British uh, turned it over to the United Nations. I mean, the United Nations mandate was essentially to come up with a solution, and Israel, the Jewish people, accepted this partition. As we know, but must be said, the Palestinian Arabs, or the Arabs who lived at the country at this time, did not accept this. They would not accept any sovereignty, any part of the land that would be inhabited and controlled by the Jews. So the first problem, of course, was that the world had to vote on this, right? This actually became one of the most important and one of the first things that the United Nations did, which was vote on this partition. Now, some of you know about the vote on the partition, which happened in 1947. Uh, the vote was, again, splitting this into about 55% Jewish, 45%, you know, Arab, and then, a couple percentage points of open city. So the vote on this, when it came before the United Nations, was a very interesting vote because the vote was there was a lot of lobbying going on this vote, including the fact that the United States was split amongst the cabinet of Harry Truman. Some of you know this. There were they were leaders of there were leaders of our State Department who did not want this mandate to go into effect, this partition plan. They were against it. And so the vote was held at the end of November 29, 1947. And it was a little bit difficult because there were already several countries that were Arab countries, which and Muslim countries, because I want to say that not all the countries that voted against it were Arab. Some of them were Muslim dominated countries like Iran, Pakistan, Turkey, that were not Arab but were Muslim that voted against it. So Israel knew that there were a bunch of countries that were going to vote against it. And so Britain abstained, China abstained. There were countries that Mexico abstained. There were countries that didn't want to, do anything. The British kind of abstained because again, this was their mess, if you will, and they, we're going to say you guys decided we're not going to vote on it. Um, but the big thing was getting those other countries that were not, where are they going to go? Well, there was a lot of lobbying, especially in South America, to get, and there's some wonderful stories about people using their economic connections in, places like Panama and Ecuador, and getting some of these countries that were in South America to vote in favor of the partition. So that was that was a major thing. It was a hurdle. And so the final vote was 33 in favor, 13 against, and 10 abstentions. And you see it sometimes portrayed in the movies where people were huddled around their radios listening to this vote. Jews, listening to a United Nations vote because they realized that this was literally voting on the existence of Israel. That people were voting on it. So it passed, and Venezuela voted in favor of it. Haiti voted in favor of it. All these countries that were kind of like, part of, you know, people use whatever relationships they could. But I mean, India voted against it. There were countries that really, um, it's unfortunately now part of their history. They couldn't support the existence of a Jewish homeland. But the South American bloc really was critical. The Latin American, Caribbean countries. I mean, these are the countries that voted in favor of it: Bolivia, Brazil, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, Guatemala, Haiti, Nicaragua, Panama, Paraguay, Peru, Uruguay, and Venezuela. Without those countries voting in favor of it, it doesn't exist. So, to some extent, the South American and Latin American, Caribbean countries really provided a bulwark for Israel's existence. So,
Rabbi,
yeah,
didn't the Soviet Union vote in favor?
yeah, the Soviets. Not only did the Soviets, it's an important point too, Philip. Thank you. I will tell you that this was an interesting part of the history. Was the Soviets were hoping that Israel would be in their sphere because they knew so many of the Jews were socialist, and they knew the kibbutzim were really in effect socialism that was put into effect at a higher level than even in their country. So all of the Soviet Union voted in favor, and at that time, it was before the Soviet Union really was formed, in the sense that eventually, the Soviet Union really is one country of 15 nations. But at that time, Belarusia had a vote, Ukraine had a vote, and the Soviet Union all had separate votes. So that's three votes just there. And then the Czechoslovakia and Poland also voted in favor as well. So those countries that were in Eastern Europe and would become the Warsaw Pact countries, they voted in favor. So yeah, that was an important block. Not as important, that's only 5 countries, not as important as the Latin American and Caribbean countries, which were 13 countries, but it was very important. And Western Europe basically voted in favor of it. But Israel was really in a kind of a problem, in that they knew that the Muslim countries were all going to vote against it, and all the Muslim countries did. Interestingly, once Israel was established, Turkey was one of the first countries that did recognize Israel, and for much of the last up really until Erdogan, Turkey and Israel had really close relationships. So there were countries that voted against Israel, but once it became a country, then they recognized it and they had relations. I mean, technically Britain didn't vote in favor of it and they had relations. India, interestingly, took a very long time um, for Israel and India to have relationships because the Indian government oftentimes would kind of position itself as the leader of the non-aligned nations and really the colonial, they saw Israel as a colonial country. And it's unfortunate because Nehru and all those leaders of India were fairly anti-Israel. They were also trying to placate a very large percentage of their population that was Muslim. And so they were pretty anti-Israel. The relationship that Israel and India have today is quite frankly because there's a Hindu nationalist government. Modi's government is much more pro-Israel than any of the previous Congress-led Indian countries. The Congress Party was always a bulwark of anti-Israel and against the West to some extent, and they saw Israel as part of that. But so the partition plan is voted on, and to some extent, the war really begins here because the Arab nations know that once this happens, Israel is going to uh, Israel is going to come into existence. There is, though, a 7-month period where Israel is trying to figure out how does it come into existence? How do we bring forth a nation and, of course, defend that nation when when having a Jewish army was not allowed. And so, for those of us who've been to Israel on our last few trips, we've taken people to the Museum of the Palmach. And what that really is trying to take you through is how Israel was able very, very quickly to transition some of its forces that had already been fighting against the Arabs, had already been fighting, some of these people have been fighting against the British as well, right? How do we turn this into an army? And how does it become what we call the Haganah? And not just the Haganah, not just the army of the partition, but how does it become the IDF?
But
How does
Rabbi,
it, yes,
when we were there and we went to the Palmach Museum, which I have to tell you was a very moving and emotional experience for me.
yeah, it's a great
Um,
museum.
I mean, I walked out of there, I was in tears. But the thing that struck me was that there were a large number of members of the Palmach that had been trained by the British to stop the Germans in World War II. That was, they wanted,
Yeah.
they thought the Germans were going to, keep moving across North Africa. And then when they realized, oh, they're not, the British then said, okay, uh, you're disbanded, you're dissolved, and you're not part of this anymore.
Yeah. So what the museum was trying to teach us is so how does a country that essentially comes into existence with this vote, there is no army, right? There is not an official army before. So you have paramilitary brigades, and there aren't one of them, right? There's the Haganah, which the Palmach functions as essentially the strike force. Then you have the Irgun, which is led by Menachem Begin, which is further right. They're the ones that are really attacking the British to some extent. And then you even have a further right one called Lehi that are also even to some extent more anti-British, but they now have to come forward together to form an army. So the IDF is actually not formed until a week and a half after the country declares its independence because they have to literally put these forces together and they create what's called and this is the important thing by the way we call is the Israeli army is called Sahal in Hebrew. That's an acronym. Tzadi, Hey, Lamed, and what it comes out to, those three words are Tzva Haganah Israel. This is the forces, literally Tzva is force, Haganah, the defense, Israel, for Israel. And so Israel Defense Forces is what the Israeli army is called. You know it and you've heard it and you've heard the chants against the Israeli army. It's called the IDF. And the IDF immediately becomes a conscription army where basically everyone who can bear arms, who can hold a gun, including women, are taken into the military. And literally from the age that they can walk, they could hold a gun in some cases. Some of these people are coming in at teenagers, and we had a guy who came to our temple a few times, Mo. Mo was the great grandfather of one of our students, Anthony Boothby. Mo actually just passed away a few years ago. He was lived in Conejo Valley. He was in the Haganah at 16. I think he actually was 15 when he went into the Haganah, and he told his mom he's going out helping with the soldiers, but he was actually fighting with the soldiers, and that's what people did. They literally they knew that this was going to be the fight was going to be. For Israel's existence and what happened and for the existence of the Jewish people. Yeah.
Yeah, he was amazing. I met him. He showed us
Yeah.
his black and white photos.
Yeah. I know
And
you were there when he was there. I
yeah,
wanted everybody to hear his story.
he
Uh,
was that was really hard fighting. That was hand-to-hand combat.
yeah.
I mean, that
Yeah.
was like really not what we think of today with
Yeah.
jet fighters and lasers and rockets. I mean, they were fighting with knives,
Yeah. Yeah.
hand to
Absolutely.
hand. Yes.
Absolutely. And I want to show you what happens. So the British remove themselves from the land, and basically, as soon as they're out, the war, which had been brewing already. I mean, there's already attacks. Jews are being attacked. Palestinians are being attacked. There's attacks going on all over the place. The British really can't keep a lid on it, and they pull out. They literally are like, "This is the last day we're there." And so on the 14th of May, which again is coming up on the secular calendar next week, it was for us, and for one of the things that again makes it kind of interesting that we have rival days of celebrating this, because of course the Palestinians call this the Nakba, the catastrophe. For us, Yom Ha'atzmaut was April 22nd on our calendar, because it's the 5th of Iyar. That was the date on the Hebrew calendar. But on May 14th, this is what happened in Tel Aviv, the Tel Aviv Museum. We're going back this year. Several of you who've been on previous trips with us to Israel, we go to Independence Hall, which has been turned into a museum, and they had to redevelop, they didn't redevelop, they had to kind of like fix it up. They had to do some infrastructure repairs, and it's been reopened. It's on Rothschild, and it's where this took place. And we always hear the Declaration of Independence. It's being read by David Ben Gurion. We're going to talk about the prime ministers today and in the next few weeks, but he was the chair of the World Zionist Organization, and then becomes the prime minister of Israel with the establishment of Israel. And this was the declaration of the establishment of Israel. So, like the United States, our founding document is the Declaration of Independence. They have a Declaration of Independence in Israel. They do not have a constitution, which some would argue they should have had. They do have equivalents of that. They do have laws, obviously, in Israel, but they don't have a constitution the way we did, which is it's a great foundational document that we have in the United States. But Israel does have a Declaration of Independence, and here's what it says: in the land of Israel, Eretz Yisrael. This was the birthplace of the Jewish people. Here, their spiritual, religious, and political identity was shaped. Here, they first attained to statehood, created cultural values of national and universal significance, and gave to the world the eternal book of books. So you can see right at the beginning, Israel is reminding people that this is our home. This is where we started. This isn't just about Jews having a nation, but having this nation, having this piece of land. It does not say in the beginning that this is land that was promised to us by God. Most of the people who are in this meeting are not people who even believe in God. David Ben Gurion was an avowed atheist, yet he said he believed in miracles. That was the weird thing about him. He says, if you don't believe in miracles, you can't understand Israel, right? He says, you have to believe in miracles. But when it came to religious observance, this was not his cup of tea. But again, he reminds people that we were forcibly exiled from our land. It was not our choice. And what he went back to, of course, is the first Zionist Congress that we talked about last week, that was held in Basel, where the Jewish people came together under Theodor Herzl's direction and said, we have a right to have a rebirth in our own country. They refer again here to the Balfour Declaration, which we talked about, which affirmed and then was later reaffirmed by the League of Nations. And then, of course, what happens is that the Holocaust happens. And then this tells the story, right? Because what happened was the massacre of millions of Jews, and this was 3 years later. And they said, survivors of the Holocaust. This is in our national document of Israel, in the Declaration of Independence, reminds people that what happens if we don't have a home? This happens. We get murdered. And then, of course, it invokes the fact that the United Nations General Assembly just voted on it. And then this is the part right here. This right is the natural right of the Jewish people to be masters of their own fate, like all other nations, in their own sovereign state. Accordingly, we, members of the People's Council, representatives of the Jewish community of Eretz Yisrael and of the Zionist movement, are here assembled on the day of the termination of the British mandate over Eretz Yisrael, and by virtue of our natural and historic right, and the strength of the resolution of the United Nations General Assembly, hereby declared the establishment of a Jewish state in Eretz Yisrael to be known as Medinat Yisrael, the state of Israel.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Rhetorical question. When I hear,
oh, wait, hold it. Let me just finish one thing. So the state of Israel will be open for the Jewish immigration and the ingathering of exiles, right? We will make sure that this will be the place where Jews can come. And in it, we are going to make sure that the social and political rights of all people of any religion, and we will guarantee freedom of religion, conscience, and language, education, and culture. It will safeguard the holy places of all religions, and it will be faithful to the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. We appeal to the United Nations to assist the Jewish people in the building up of its state and to receive the state of Israel into the comity of nations. We appeal in the very midst of the onslaught launched against us now for months to the Arab inhabitants of the state of Israel to preserve peace and participate in the upbuilding of the state on the basis of full and equal citizenship and due representation in all its provisional and permanent institutions. We extend our hand to all neighboring states and their peoples in an offer of peace and good neighborliness, and appeal to them to establish bonds of cooperation and mutual help with the sovereign Jewish people settled in its own land. The state of Israel is prepared to do its share in a common effort for the advancement of the Middle East. And this is the most religious part of it. Placing our trust in the rock of Israel, Sur Yisrael, which, again, some would say that's pretty much God, but is it the rock of Israel? Are we the rock of Israel? Or is every Jew the rock of Israel? We affix our signatures on this proclamation at this provisional council of state on the soil of the homeland in the city of Tel Aviv on this Shabbat Eve, the 5th day of Iyar. So as soon as Shabbat goes out, this is when they do this. And here's the people who signed it. And you can see, unlike the Declaration of Independence of the United States, this document is signed by women. Yeah.
so Rabbi,
Not a lot of women, right? But women. And one of them is right here. Golda Meir. Golda Meirs. Yes, go. Sorry.
two things. One, thank you for sharing that document. And I thought about when you were reading it, compare that document to the Hamas charter.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
but
Yes.
more importantly, or of equal importance, when you hear people say, I'm very offended by this question, does Israel have the right to resist? And I won't even engage with someone who asks me that, because my only comment would be, the United Nations General Assembly created the state of Israel. End of story.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah,
I, there's nothing more for me to say to you. I'm not having this
it's
debate.
an interesting thing to say, right? Because you're right, right? It's what you kind of have to say. But what, of course, is so interesting is the United Nations has been such a problem for Israel in the last 25, 30 years that it's ironic that this institution that has turned on Israel to such a large extent, because again, at the end of the day, the United Nations is it has an inherent flaw, which is there are no requirements for countries to be to not be tyrannical, despotic, and murderous regimes in order to be part of it. They have equal votes, and so and the blocks of terror and the blocks of of countries who've had, economic and and political power over other countries, of course, dictate the rules. And so the vast majority of nations there are either not strong enough to really, in some cases, do the right thing, or again, um, what happens when countries like Russia, for example, um, or China, who have permanent votes on the Security Council, how can you take that stuff seriously? So, but let's backtrack. Let's get back to where we are, which is 1948. Of course, as the Declaration of Independence has said, the war started already. It started in 1947. But what happens after Israel declares its independence is that Israel, of course, the neighbors do not decide to be neighborly, and they attack. And they attack from every single direction. So you see that Egypt attacks from the south, Jordan attacks from the east, Syria attacks from the northeast, and of course, Lebanon sends in troops from the north. Now, here's the crazy thing: Iraq sends in 7,000 troops. That's a substantial amount of troops back then. Iraq doesn't share a border with Israel. This was a united Arab attack on the land of Israel. And Israel, you know, knew that this was going to happen when they declared their independence. They knew that this was what's going to happen, which is why they asked the United Nations essentially for help. They said in there, United Nations, we appeal to you, to assist the Jewish people in the building up of its state. So, can you tell these countries that this was a vote, and the agreement was the agreement? We're willing to live in the places that we're going to live in, but no, this is what um, happens. And again, part of the problem is Israel at this point is still in the process on May 15th, are still in the process of essentially establishing an army. Now, the Palestinians, the Arabs, have a similar issue, which is where's their central army? But they but they have 5 countries that are fighting on their behalf. So it's not like there's a equal balance here in the sense that some people will say, well, Israel didn't have an army, but neither did the Arabs, neither did whatever you want to call the Palestinians at this point, because they don't have an army either. But some of them were also trained by the British. The British had trained the Jordanian army. The British trained the Jordanian army, which is why the Jordanian attacks from what's called the Arab Legion were so dangerous. And I will say this Arab Legion that was trained by the British are the only army that achieved their goals, which was to hold and uh, capture Jerusalem. This was the Arab Legion. All of these other Arab forces, all of them are defeated. All of them. The Egyptian army is defeated. The the Syrian army is defeated. The Palestinian, if you would call it, which is really the Arab Liberation Army that you see here, they're all defeated. And there's a series of truces that go on, kind of like, well, who knows what's going to happen here. But there was fighting and then it stopped. It started, it stopped. This is what happened during the first month essentially of the war. Now, Israel was able, and we're not going to we could spend many sessions just talking about the War of Independence, but it was a war for survival. Israel was not guaranteed success, and to some extent, the State Department of the United States told Truman, you are going to watch the Jewish people be murdered in another Holocaust, because you telling them that they can have a state is foolish, because our assessments are they don't have enough troops to defend themselves. Even if they put guns in if every woman in that country holds a weapon, they're still not going to be able to defeat the Arab armies. And so this was based on what intelligent people in the State Department were telling U.S. leadership. This is not going to work out well for the Jews. If you really care about the Jews, Truman, they argued, you should tell them not to declare independence. Come up with another solution, but not independence. So the initial Israeli army during this period, it only numbers about 30,000. By the end of the war, Israel is able to get about 100,000 people into military readiness. That is enough to defeat these Arab armies. In the end, about 6,500 Israelis are killed during the War of Independence. A massive amount of people for Israel. That no other war in Israel's history killed as many people as the War of Independence. 6,500. The death toll on the other side, probably closer to about 20,000. The Arab armies that attack, these Syrian armies and Iraq and Jordanian and Egyptian armies, about 20,000 are killed. The war really goes on for really into the beginning of 1949 till March of 1949. So it's a long war. And as far as Israel is concerned, there is no war like it in its history, not only because it defined and made the country have boundaries and have a national boundary, but I mean, think about it. If Israel doesn't win, there is no Israel there. But the casualties was devastating. And this is what the map of Israel looks like afterwards. And let me explain what's going on this map, and why this map is an important map to look at. So this map shows you the blue areas that were the Jewish partition, the Jewish parts of the partition, right? The pink areas were the Arab parts of the partition. What the green is the way Israel looked in March of 1949 when the war was over. So what the Palestinians, Arabs, whatever you want to call it, what they lost was this chunk of the Galilee, which is where there were larger Arab communities. part of the boundary of the West Bank, what's now called the West Bank, because that's what they left. We're left with this green area. So this area, which would have provided a contiguous little strip, little piece of land where people could have gone, Arabs could have gone from the Galilee down to their border with Egypt. This is the Gaza Strip. So you can see the area around Gaza was much larger as well. So this chunk, these chunks around here, these chunks around here, and this chunk here in the Galilee were all areas that the Arabs would have had if they had accepted the mandate. Okay. Does that nation make any sense? No. But it's based on population. It was based on the hope that Arabs and Jews could live together in the same area. The only area here that I want to talk about right now that you see here in the pink is area that was technically part of what would have been the Jerusalem International City. This pink area winds up being part of Jordan. The West Bank falls into Jordanian hands, and this area was held by the Arabs, by the Jordanians, and the Jews were expelled from this whole area. So it's this area here, and then this area around here. So what's interesting is that this was the loss that Israel suffered, which was a major loss, which was the loss of Jerusalem. Jerusalem wasn't part of Israel in the sense that it was supposed to be an international city, but the hope would be that Israel would be able to at least have access to it. From 1948 to 1967, Jews are not allowed to enter the old city. For 20 years, unlike Israel's promise and what Israel delivered after 1967, which we'll talk about in 2 weeks, Israel made sure that those sites would be open to all peoples. From 1948 to 1967, the Jordanians did not let Jews come into the old city, could not go to the Wailing Wall. Every synagogue in Jerusalem was blown up and destroyed, and there was no Jewish presence in the old city for the first time in basically 3,000 years.
Rabbi,
There were always Jews that maintained a presence in the old city, found a way to live there. But during the Jordanian occupation, during those 20 years, we know of no Jews that were allowed to be there. They were evacuated. There was, at the end of the war in 1949, any Jews that were left behind were able to, they did literally like a evacuation of the Jews that were still fighting in Jerusalem, and those Jews were able to survive the siege. Many of the Jews of Jerusalem were killed. Yes.
why didn't the Jordanians, if they were destroying all the synagogues in Jerusalem, why didn't they destroy the Western Wall?
It's a good question. They couldn't, because if they destroyed the Western Wall, the Haram al-Sharif, the mosque on top, would collapse.
Okay.
So they knew they couldn't pull it down because it's a retaining wall. According to what we know, they turned it into a toilet. They turned it into a latrine area. That was what they thought would be funny and disrespectful. So
Rabbi,
there were Jews, by the way. I know one of them. My friend's mother went into Jordan in 1958 or something like that. She's about 20 years old. She got to go into Jordan and went to the wall, went to Israel, went to Jordan, but went into that part of Arab-controlled Jerusalem, which was the old city, during that period of time. So I was like, you're one of the only Jews I've ever met who went there during the Jordanian control. Jordan controlled this area, and then Egypt controlled this area. And this, by the way, is a very important thing to remind people when they talk about Israel's control of the Middle East, of land within the real history of the Middle East, is that for 20 years, Egypt controlled this whole part of the Sinai, this whole part of Gaza, never gave it to the Palestinians to have a country, and the Jordanians controlled this whole area of the West Bank, and at no time did they ever turn it into a Palestinian country. Never. It was never done. They had 20 years to do it, and they never did it. Yes, please, John. John.
I just wanted to, sorry about that. I have to put it on mute. I just wanted to find out where was the outrage when, during that time when, Jordan was blowing up the synagogues. Was it, it
Nothing.
was nowhere, was it?
There
Nil.
was nothing. And I will say this, part of this is going back and looking at hindsight. Right now, hindsight is 2020. So part of this is looking back at this period and going, well, how did people not react to this? How did look? How people didn't, because there are a lot of people who don't care, and there are a lot of people who, quite frankly, even then, even if they had some sense of compassion on the Jews, who again 5 years ago had been murdered, had been murdered in death camps. But let's face it, they didn't care. And I will tell you this: as much as it pained Israel, and it's part of Israel's history, that the loss of the old city, the loss of Jerusalem, was devastating. It's part of, well, we won. We won tremendous amount of the land increased, right? It went up by another about 30%. We lost Jerusalem. And so it ended up with Jordanian annexation of this area and Egyptian occupation of the Gaza. And you can point to it and say, every time people, and most people don't know it, why is there no Palestinian homeland? Because for 20 years, for again, if you had accepted the partition, this would have been your country. But when you had 20 years to do this, and you didn't create your country, what the reason was. They were telling their people, let us conquer the rest of Israel, and then you can go anywhere. Then all the rest of this will be your country. If you accept these territories, you're basically saying you accept Israel's right to exist. We have now made it very clear, what has been made very clear is that the Arab nations, the Arab peoples, the Palestinian people, do not want Israel's existence on 1 square inch of this land. And to say that there is somebody on the other side who wants to have peace is just not true. You can say we would love for there to be a Palestinian government that will run these areas and run them as respectful and as a shared polity. It is not going to happen. Why is it not going to happen? Because they don't want it to happen. And if free elections, we're jumping the gun, but if free elections were held today amongst Palestinians, they would vote for Hamas. It's a fact. So you cannot wish this to happen. And it's fair to, and the reason why I'm jumping ahead is because it's fair to ask at this point, what would have happened? Well, it didn't happen because there was never a desire on the side of the Palestinian people or the Arab people, whoever you want to call them, to accept any existence of Israel. And that's the proof of it is 1948 to 1967. This is the proof. This could have been an Arab country, and it never was. So nobody stopped it from happening other than the Palestinians themselves and their Arab brothers and sisters.
You don't think anything would have happened with Rabin if the American hadn't killed him?
No, it wasn't American. It was
Wasn't he an American guy?
No, he was an Israeli. He was a religious, a nut, a religious fanatic, Israeli fanatic who killed Rabin. We'll get to that. But there even in the 90s, and we'll get to the 90s, we're going to get there. But here at this point, look, you essentially have to ask that question, because you can't go, well, this is what should have happened. Well, it didn't happen, and it didn't happen because it was never going to happen. It wasn't like, well, they could have just done this. Well, of course, but there was never a desire to have it happen. So that's the truth. There was never on the other side any real feeling that there should be Arab-Jewish cooperation, because the Arabs didn't want it. We're going to get to the 67 war next week, or 2 weeks from now. Again, we don't have class next week, but when we come back 2 weeks, we're going to read about 67. But right now we're about 1949, 1950. And the war is over. Israel has now established itself in this area with an army. And there's so many things I didn't we didn't talk about. And there's so many wonderful stories, and there's books about it, and there's I'm going to post some of the books. There's also a movie that was made, two movies actually, and I know another group that's trying to make a movie about the beginning of the Israeli Air Force, because for the first few days of this war in 1948, Israel had no air force. They had four planes, and Israel had to smuggle in these planes because the British wouldn't let them have planes. You could smuggle guns, and we've talked about the way Israelis were building guns, knowing that this was going to happen. Right? This next trip we're going in November, we're going to the gun factory in Rehovot, where the Israelis were building munitions under the noses of the British. But you cannot bring planes in. You can't hide a plane. So when the planes finally started coming into the land of Israel, once Israel you know, once Israel was established, those planes, which by the way were Avia planes, these were planes that came to Israel from Czechoslovakia. These were a version of the Messerschmitt, of the Nazi. They were not Nazi planes. There were Nazi guns, by the way, that were used by Israel, because Israel got a lot of weapons from Czechoslovakia, which was kind of the transit place for Soviet weapons and for old German weapons, and a lot of the stuff came in there. And you can hear wonderful stories about some of the ways that Israel smuggled in weapons, and amazing stories of how you know how the mafia made sure that guns could get to Israel out of the ports of New York. That there was so much munitions left over from World War II, but United States had an arms embargo against Israel. It was one of the things that Israel had to deal with because America wanted to not make the Arabs upset. So they wouldn't let American weapons go, but America still had weapons go because very clever Americans figured out ways to get weapons from the United States over. And in some cases, they smuggled them right out of the ports of New York and New Jersey with the help of the mafia. True story. Those stories are crazy stories, and some of them are coming to light because the people are all they've died, so these stories can come out. But there were amazing stories of people who said, we're going to do what we can. In some cases, we're going to break the law to make sure that Israel can have these. So there are a few amazing movies again about the stories of. One of the movies was made actually by Steven Spielberg's sister, made a documentary about the Israeli Air Force, the nascent Israeli Air Force. So again, this is what Israel looks like in that year in 1949. But let's take a look back at immigration and where the new immigrants are going to come from. Does anybody else have any comments or questions as I get up this next picture? Sorry.
Was that the basis for the failure? I mean, where President Clinton could not get Arafat to agree because fundamentally he could not agree to a Jewish state.
Yeah. I mean, the when Clinton found that what he had hoped for, right? The lie that he had bought into, which was that there was a real willingness, because people knew that Yasser Arafat and the Palestinian, we'll get to it when we get to the 90s, but when they knew that that Yasser Arafat was saying one thing in English and in French, and then another thing in Arabic, it went when the rubber met the road. That's where it became obvious that this was a front, that this was a lie, because you can talk two different languages when you don't have responsibility, and when people are not actually holding you responsible for your actions. Once you're supposed to be a legitimate leader, you can't get away with that. And so that's where that all came about. So, but we'll get to that. In the meantime, let's take a look at immigration. Back to this chart. Because, as you can see, up until we kind of went through the ways of immigration from World War One, and actually even before World War One to the first Aliyah, but looking at pre-state immigration, much of the people came from Eastern Europe and what was the Soviet Union. And then in Western Europe, you have this huge band, which again we talked about, were Jews from Germany and Austria and Italy and some of the countries that were, um, you know, early experimenters with fascism, and some of these Jews were able to get out. But that's where you have the that's where you have those groups. You see this Western Asia band, which is somewhat significant in the sense that it's these are Jews from from Turkey, um, uh, Armenia, Azerbaijan, the Caucasus, those areas, and and so after Israel is established, there are still a lot of Jews that are going to be coming in from um, uh, the former Soviet Union, huge band here, that come after the war, including Jews from Hungary, Jews from Warsaw Pact states, Poland, who realize there's no future for us in these countries. They come back and everything's gone, and there's still anti-Semitism. There's, believe it or not, there are still people who hate Jews in Poland, even though there's no Jews left. And so the ones that come back go, there's no future for us here, and a lot of them still are making that move to Israel. But now,
there was a great scene at Yad Vashem. A woman it was film of a woman, a Jewish woman, who went back to her home in Poland, and there was a Polish family living in her house, and she went into the house. She showed up at the house, and she said they asked her, "Why are you here? Why aren't you dead?"
yeah.
Rabbi.
Yeah.
So hold on, let me lower the volume. So, I last time was it a Monday call or last Wednesday? I was telling you about the the sisterhood book that we were listening to. And yeah, oh yeah, yesterday. And Glory reminded me that one of the, by the way, we watched the 60 Minutes thing, and it brought me to tears.
Yeah.
The
if you can get through that without crying, you don't have a heart.
Oh my God, I was like a little baby. But in the book, one of the ladies one of the survivors tried to go back to their place, just like what Philip said. They tried to go back to their place. They didn't ask them whether they were dead. They wouldn't give them their property back.
Yeah.
They went back to their house. It's like coming back to my house on Bluestone, and somebody's taking it over and says, "No, sorry, it's not yours anymore."
Yeah.
That's it. That's all I wanted.
It was amazing for that to happen, and for nobody to, I mean, there was no, look, so much of Europe was being rebuilt after the war that, like, who was coming to their aid? Where was this? There was nobody that was going to save them. So this was, yeah, it was devastating. And today we're probably, I'm gonna maybe get to, I created, with the help of ChatGPT, a really cool really cool um a really cool map, or not, a timeline of Israel's prime ministers. But I really do want to focus back on the immigration issue right now, because what you see after the war, from 1948 to 51, this huge bump in Western Asia. Now, this group that's coming in after Israel's established is from Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. These are countries that are Arab countries. You also see this huge spike from North Africa. Where do you think that is? Who do you think that is, folks? North Africa. Come on.
Egypt.
Ethiopia?
Yeah.
Egypt.
Nope. Nope.
Algeria?
That would be Middle Africa. That's Abyssinia. That's Ethiopia and Eritrea. That's this area, which you can see. Yeah, there's a little bit. Oh no, that's the other. Sorry, Abyssinia, Ethiopia is here on this map. You don't get it until the 90s, or you start to get it a little bit in the 80s. But that's Ethiopia. Nope. No, this is
Morocco,
North Africa. Yes, Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria.
Algeria.
These countries had very vibrant. Egypt had very, some of you have met Rita. Well, Rita Rafat did not come to Israel because her husband was Muslim. She actually came to the United States, but because she was Jewish, she had to get out of Egypt. These countries, the green countries, this huge spike that you have here, 48, and it goes all the way to 67. These are Jews that had to flee their homes in Muslim countries, primarily Arab countries, because we're talking about really here, North Africa, all the way out to Iraq, but also Jews from Iran that start to come to the land of Israel. So they're technically they're not Arab, but they're Muslim. But these countries, the Jewish community has to get out. They leave their countries with nothing. And this is another version of, again, what you just talked about in the Holocaust, where people literally came back one day from work and found out that the government said, you no longer have a home here. You no longer have a business here. And we're talking about Jews who had lived in Damascus, for example, or Baghdad for thousands of years. And so what is not told, and again, what's now we're starting to at least get a little wiser to remind people when we tell the story, is that the story of Israel is not just a story, and you hear it all the time, go back to Poland, go back to Germany, go back to Russia. No, these are people who lived in the Middle East, who were forced out of their homes and found their home in the traditional homeland of the Jewish people in the land of Israel. They were not, in some cases, given a choice, but even if they were given a choice, these are people you can see the greens, guys. There's more green than there is Europe.
Which
Okay?
green?
Both the light green, which is North Africa, that's Morocco, Egypt, Algeria, Tunisia, and the dark green, which is Syria and Iraq and Yemen.
Thank you.
And Rabbi,
So the greens, that's why I say the both greens, the light green and the dark green. Yeah.
there are Arab commentators today who say their nations made a huge mistake in doing this, because what they inadvertently did was build up the state of Israel by
Yeah.
expelling the Jews.
Yeah. And let me make it clear to you, these Jews that settled in the land of Israel, in our national homeland, they did not come to live in really wonderful circumstances. These were Jews that came and wound up in tent camps, what were called ma'abarot. Tens of thousands of them were in tent camps for 5 to 10 years in some cases. These are Jews from Iraq that are literally have nothing now. In some cases, they had businesses. In some cases, they had, they were doctors, they were lawyers, and they came to the country, to the land of Israel, and were put in transit camps, the Ma'abarot. Now, many people have kind of felt that this was creating a segregated society, that this hurt the Jews from Arab lands, we call them Mizrahi Jews, that this put them at a disadvantage as opposed to the Jews who were from Europe who had already established themselves. There is no question that when you come into a tent camp, you're going to be lagging behind economically, educationally, etc. But Israel was rebuilding, not just building, but rebuilding areas that had been destroyed during the War of Independence, because a lot of Israel was devastated. I mean, parts of Tel Aviv, which was the first Jewish city, parts of Tel Aviv were devastated. I mean, this is what Tel Aviv looked like, downtown Tel Aviv looked like after it was bombed by the Egyptian Air Force. So this was this was a very difficult task of nation building and sometimes rebuilding, but also taking in a huge influx of people and saying, okay, we have to settle these people, we have to build a nation, and we have no infrastructure. Now, how did Israel survive? Because Israel had survived a war, but now they had to survive this. They had to survive how to take these people from all over the world and merge them and build one country. And this is the real miracle of what Israel did. This is the miracle, and this is what we're going to focus on a little bit more in the next weeks, how Israel was able to do this. Part of it, and this is the irony, you take people from all around the world. They speak different languages. The Jews who lived in Iraq spoke Arabic. They didn't speak Hebrew, they spoke Arabic. The Jews from Russia, from the Soviet Union, they spoke Russian. Some of them spoke Yiddish. The Jews from Germany spoke German. You have a country where people can't communicate to each other because they don't have a language in common. Well, they learned Hebrew. And so Hebrew became a unifying force. Learning Hebrew became an imperative for people because it allowed them to talk with their neighbors. It allowed them to talk with people at work. But Israel had this really weird secret, which is the more that Israel was put under pressure, the more people tried to kill Israel. It meant that they had to have a very strong army. And the army became the incubator for leadership, for innovation, and for relationships. Because when you serve in the army with somebody, they become your friends, they become your comrades, they become your brothers and sisters. And ironically, making Israel fight constantly was they brought the country together through human relationship. And not just because they're your neighbors. Look, I don't need to tell you, we have parts of our country that are very integrated in the sense that there's Harlem and there's Jewish area of New York and there's this, but these people all live in their own communities. Israel became a country where your next door neighbor was probably from a different country, whole different situation, and you had a chance to live together with them, and you had a chance to um, get to know people of different backgrounds because you were thrust together and you served with these people in the military and you literally were you became a country in the crucible of war, not just because you had to win, which they did, but because these become your brothers and sisters. And so Israel was able to accelerate the integration and the assimilation of people from all around the world because of this need to be in the military. And once people are done with their military service, right, when they do their few years of military service, they go into the Miluim, they go into the reserves. And they're in the reserves from the time they're about 23, 24, all the way up to the time they're in their 40s. And those people that they get back together with in reserves, those are their friends, those are their crew, those are their buddies. And they might not see each other but once a year, twice a year. But when they're together, they're friends again. And they go back to their stories and they go back to that common relationship. And so they have these connections that are amazing. They're amazing connections that people have. So because Israel had to do this, had to be on a constant state of readiness, they created a country that was much more unified and assimilated at a rate that nothing like this has ever happened. There were definitely stratifications in Israel's society, and some of them still exist. There still has not been a Mizrahi prime minister of Israel. Every prime minister of Israel since 1948, we'll talk about it next session, has been from an Ashkenazi background. But what's happened now over the last 25, 30 years, is there's been such assimilation in Israel that the old differences of culture and of background, from Ashkenazi to Mizrahi to even to some extent Ethiopian, those have broken down because people are now mixed. They're married. They married and had children together, and the gene pool is mixture of people of all different backgrounds, all different cultural and linguistic backgrounds, and the Israelis are now not Mizrahi or Ashkenazi, they're Israeli. And so when somebody says, where's your family from? Nowadays, it's much more common when you meet an Israeli to say, well, my father was from Iraq and my mother's family was from the former Yugoslavia. You hear stories like, all different kinds of Russian. I'm part Iraqi. And so that's been what, what's happened to Israel. And by the way, it's made the people absolutely beautiful because they have this wonderful, vibrant mix of cultures and backgrounds. And there's a little bit of the Jewish people that came from every one of those places that brought a little bit into Israel. And it's one of the reasons why, again, why are Americans such an, I think, overall a fairly attractive people? Because we're a mix of people. We're a mix of cultures. We're a mix of different ethnicities. And it's one of the things that, some people go, why are Americans so much better looking than the British people if we're British? I said, well, we're not British. And by the way, my wife's not really British. I don't want to make the British. I just said the British were ugly people. But when people say, well, wait, Americans was founded by Scottish people, I said, why? Because we're a mixture of people. We're a melting pot. And Israel, during this time, very quickly becomes a melting pot. It becomes a place where people come together, and it's not always easy. It's not always smooth, but by force of necessity, right? This becomes a country where people come to they come together. Now we're gonna we finish up now, and as I said in the next class, we're going to talk about some of the defining pieces of Israel. I thought maybe today we talk about the 56 war. It's not that crucial. We talk about it today. We'll talk about it in 2 weeks. The 56 war of the Suez, which bears some very striking similarities to today, by the way.
I remember the newspaper
Iran.
headlines in 56.
Yeah, well,
now.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities, right? Blockades and alliances, right? Because Israel fought with the British and the French during that war, which was a huge morale boost to Israel to be able to fight alongside the British and the French in what they called Operation Musketeer. But we'll talk about it in the next session, and unfortunately, again, we'll be talking about the '67 war and the '73 war, what we call the Yom Kippur War. So we'll be talking about a little bit more about some wars. But again, I want you to see and I want you to understand, when we talk about Israel, to talk about it as a series of wars is really it's not the truth. The story of Israel is really a series of immigration, because the country's narrative, and I hope one day Israel will have enough gaps between wars where people will talk about what really happened, which was the ingathering of Jews from around the world, because this happened right under our noses while we were all sleeping. Well, we weren't sleeping, but we were having a good time. The economy was great in the United States, and for the most part, the end of the Soviet Union, we had much more peaceful times. But look at what happened to Israel. Look at the immigration that happened over that 10-year period. Amazing. What an amazing absorption of Jews, as you can see, almost entirely from USSR. We get
Can
a
I
whole
ask a
nother
question?
wave. Yeah. Uh-huh.
John was talking about 60 Minutes. Is that something I should see? What were you
Yeah,
talking
if
about?
if you can, we were talking about we talked about it. Yeah, it was brought up. I think we brought it up at Friday night services too. Was the book that the sisterhood, that the book club, sorry, not the sisterhood, the book club is reading, which is the story of the youngest survivors. And 60 Minutes, Leslie Stahl did an interview with these three of these amazing children that were born in the camps. So it's a 60 Minutes. You can watch it on on the different streamers. I think Paramount Plus or one of them has the 60 Minutes episodes. Or
YouTube.
You can watch it on YouTube.
How recent is it?
Like a month ago,
Okay.
2 months ago, 2 months ago.
Well, the other 60 Minutes story, if you should see on YouTube or somewhere, was just last week with former Senator Ben Sass.
Yeah,
It-
no,
it-
listen, I know
Man, that was
wasn't that wasn't Jewish, but it'll also make you tear up too. If you have a heart.
It was powerful, and
Yeah, but it's interesting because 60 Minutes though, Ben Sass, I mean, my wife who knew nothing about him was very moved by it too. You're right, but 60 Minutes is doing like a Jewish story every week. It's like, and it started even before what's her name got there.
Barry
Barry
Weiss.
Weiss. Before Barry Weiss got there, they were already doing it because Leslie Stahl did that story. I think before, maybe I'm sure that story was in the can before Barry got there. So they've been doing this. I mean, they know their audience. They know their audience, and it's interesting because they've been doing a lot of stories. But again, as we know, unfortunately, people like dead Jews more than they like live Jews. And so when people, say to us, well, why do Holocaust stories still do well? Because people like to see us dead or near dead. But this is really really an interesting story of, like I said, with Israel, we got to focus on what the real story is, which is the wars are an outgrowth. The wars were out of necessity, we're out of the reality of it. But the real story of Israel is not the story of winning one war and then winning another war and then having to win another war. It's really the story of how these people got there in the midst of all this, and how Israel built a country around immigrants that come from every part of the world and have brought just wonderful, vibrant energy to the country. And it's an amazing story. So I really am kind of telling
Rabbi.
the story a little bit more through Aliyah than through the military. Yeah, sorry. Yes.
I put the Esther. I
Oh, yeah,
put
I
the
see.
link in the chat.
Yeah. So in
Oh,
the
great.
chat,
Thank
in the
you.
chat, you have the YouTube link. So
Okay.
folks, again, we do not have class next week. Please again share this with people who don't know the history of Israel, who don't know the real history. Again, we talked about some of the most crucial issues, which are why was there no Palestinian homeland from 1949 to 1967? That's 20 years. That's not 5 years. That's not a few months where people could say, well, the opportunity passed us. Now you had 20 years to do that. And again, it's just part of the fraud, the lie that I spoke about at the beginning. I know some of you weren't here in the first few minutes. The lies that are being perpetrated that literally are part of a great deceit that's happening, and we have to combat it. We have to learn more about it. That's why I said this session was so important. We will not have a session next week, but we will have a session on the 19th, or sorry, on the 20th. We'll come back on the 20th for our for the history of Israel, kind of like from 56, from the war in the Suez to the 90s, which take us into the first attempts at a peace treaty with the Palestinians, which again is very important to understand what didn't happen. Sometimes we talk about what did
You built
happen.
a $49
We also have to
garden
talk
hose nozzle.
about what
Every
didn't
pressure
happen.
washer on the market.
And what didn't happen was the fact that they were not at any stage have they been prepared. And I mean, the Palestinians prepared, Arabs prepared to accept the right of the Jewish people to live in our homeland. So we will take that story up in 2 weeks. In the meantime, we will see you Friday night, and we'll see you in the coming days, and lots of stuff happening around us that we hope will be a good few weeks until we're here again on Wednesday night. And as I said, next Wednesday, ironically, or next Thursday, sorry, will be the day of Israel's founding on the secular calendar. The anniversary will be the 78th anniversary of Israel's existence, and it'll be interesting to see how that's treated in the press, how that's treated on the streets, where that plays out in the history of the Jewish people, because it is our holiday as well, and it is a holiday time for us to reflect. So next week or next time we'll continue the story. Thank you everybody for being here, and
Bye all.
we'll see you soon. Take care.
Thanks, Rabbi. Bye,
Thank you,
everybody.
Rabbi.
Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.
Thank
Take care.
you.
See ya. Bye-bye.
Yes, thank you.
Bye-bye.